Hey everybody, Wayne Dorban here, and we also got Mark. His webcam's not working right now, and I'm going to let him say where he's at. I kind of know, but I'm not exactly sure on his location. We got Belgium. I was asking everybody coming in to throw in where they're from, and I know we've got at least 4 or 5 continents already, and a bunch of places in Europe. Just learned that it's been very dry in Spain, getting a little moisture there. They just had their first rain in 6 months. So we're going to get started right away. I really don't have a lot of announcements. I'm actually going to jump off, and I've got Stephanie here with me, and she'll help Mark continue keeping on track. And I got Mark in Bangladesh that's helping us on the board also. I actually have to get back to my ranch for the first time in daylight since we had our event over the weekend, which was very cool, by the way, and I'm just going to mention it. We had about 30 or so people that were eaters that were there, team members. We had 12 people for our aquaculture workshop on Sunday, our live workshop, of which I think 4 of those 12 were team members. And so we're excited about coming to your place in the world. Actually, our speaker on Thursdays now is from Maui, Dr. Lopes. And I wasn't totally joking when I told her that we're going to come over there and have a live event where she's at in Maui. But it was a great weekend and had a lot of fun with people. We're at 2,500 members now, actually 2,527. And it means we gained 1,000 in a week. Now, we didn't do all of that. We had a couple of our team members that did some really cool stuff. One of them, William Horvath from Croatia, mailed to his list and encouraged people to become members. And I know we picked up 300 or 400 from that. We actually did a press release about our event and about the EAT team, and we gained some from that. And then several other people. And I'll just tell you, I'm sure some of you did, because we're going to start charging for new members starting in the middle of October now. And not for you guys. You guys are in, and this will be free for you for as long as we do this, and we hope that's a long time. But we've been putting a lot of time into this. We're coming up to 4 months actually, starting next week, and we've got over 55 hours of video up now, and the teaching that Mark has given. You guys, I know you realize this would be thousands and thousands of dollars if you paid for this separately. So. We're excited, and we really, the Facebook team or group is growing, and there will still be a free portion of the EAT team. We're actually going to call it Eat Free, and that came from some suggestions from team members, and it'll be a separate section here on the site. So as you log in, you're going to see Eat Free, which you'll have access to. You aren't going to really need to go there. There won't be anything there that isn't in the same EAT site that you're now getting to. If you guys would give us some suggestions, maybe put it in the question. We're not exactly sure what we're going to call this group. I'm going to give you what name I'd like to call it, and that's the Elite EAT team, because it kind of rhymes and it makes it sound cool, and that's where it's everybody that's been the founders, and you guys are all founder members. Everybody that's gotten in free before we start the paid model here is going to be a founder, and we're going to set some stuff up that's special for you too. I'm not sure exactly what that'll be, but if you've got some ideas, throw it in the chat about in the questionnaire about what we might call what will now be the group that is you folks and the people that are getting in afterwards that are becoming a member, not the free group. So we'll have a separate Facebook page, for example, for the free group, and they won't be able to get access into ours. So, no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mark. Mark, it's all yours.
Hey, I'm just going to make one comment about the inner group. I think we're a different bunch here. Let's eat the core. Eat, the core. Anyways,
Core, that's good.
We're continuing our exposition on forest ecology. And yes, I have to give credit to Bill Mollison. Of any human being that I know of on this planet besides my parents, he influenced my life more than anybody else. Upon discovering permaculture, all of the works at the time, which were thin little pamphlets that I was able to get way back when in the day, he transformed my life, totally changed my life. And what I do today is because of his inspiration and his leadership. He wasn't just a talker, blogger, blabber. He actually did it. And this is his property right here, living right in the middle of it, and teaching around the world. So wherever you are, Bill, thank you very much. He did say in one interview anyways that when you hear of his death, don't believe it, it's a lie. So we'll see if that was actually the truth or a lie. But hats off, Bill Mollison. The planet is a better place because of you, and I'm grateful for that. Wrote the book, Uncle Bill. One of the quotes that I hadn't heard this one before that I remembered is that there's one and there's only one solution, and we have almost no time to try it. We must turn all of our resources to repairing the natural world and train all of our young people to help. They want to, and we need to give them this last chance to create forests, soils, clean waters, clean energy, secure communities, stable regions, and to know how to do it from hands-on experience. That is what permaculture, in theory, is supposed to be all about, is actual reality, repairing the whole planet, the natural world that we live within. It is the goal and mission of Forest Agriculture Enterprises, our edible tree and shrub nursery, restoration agriculture development around the world. We want to do restoration agriculture, farm-scale agriculture producing staple food crops from ecological systems. And it's what the Ecolonomics Action Team is all about, ecological economics for real. We're the action team. We're not the, the whatever, sit by passively on your hands and blog about it team. And so we're going to be continuing our talk on forest ecology. We've been in talking about disturbance for the past few weeks, and fire being the major disturbance driving ecosystem structure and function globally for as long as we know. We'll cover a little bit more of the smaller ones, the not as widespread types of disturbance tonight, and then we'll of course tie it back into strategies that we can employ to mimic a disturbance, and we'll transition into where our next segment is going to be. Our next segment is going to be on succession, which is the change of ecosystem structure and function through time. And of course, we remember that disturbance is what causes those changes. So here's some more of them. Back to fire. This shows a broad map of North America. I apologize, all of you folks from other continents. If you look at where you're located on this map, it will basically tell you the types of fire, how frequent the fires were. Like in the grasslands and savannas were very frequent surface fires. They were usually moderate to low intensity. You know, in the coniferous forest, infrequent but severe surface and crown fires, like jack pine with severe surface and crown fires, etc. So go back and look at this and figure out where you are and understand that if we imitate how fire interacted with our system, where we are operating as close to naturally, I put natural in quotes, you couldn't see my fingers, naturally as possible. This is an example here of a before on the left and an after. When we're thinking about fire, remember the difference between ground fires, surface fires, crown fires, the different fire adaptation of plants, the different effects of fire. Then there's the different there's intensities. Like a high intensity fire is a very, very hot, very tall flame front. But if it's moving fast, it's not very severe. So you can have a high intensity, low severity, or you can have it the other way around, a very not very severe fire, but it's slow moving, and it ends up being, really really damaging to the system. Then the frequency, how frequently does that fire come back typically in your system? And if your guys are living in lodgepole pine, jack pine, pond pine, pitch pine type systems, those are very fast return intervals between fires. Just understand that. So to treat your land like this, it may appear to many people to be somewhat abusive. It's not. You're imitating a natural process here. There's some very fascinating types of disturbances that are associated with wind. We talk quite a bit about wind, especially where there are regular prevailing winds and where there are accelerators, like a certain shaped mountains and ridges with these regular winds coming across. There ends up being a wave regeneration pattern that I kind of explain. Is you got those winds that accelerate over a ridge or strike a hillside a certain way, and the oldest trees snap. They snap right off. Where they snap, of course, it releases the understory, which grows up. And of course, when the oldest ones snap, that means that now the next oldest ones are the next ones in line, and the next wind events that come through will snap those. And it's a very regular system. It's one of the more regular systems out there. There's places where pines do it and spruce does it, but the classic is fir, whether it's Douglas fir or balsam fir, silver fir. And this is balsam fir in Maine. There's several places in Maine. You just look at these hillsides and you wonder how they got that pattern on it. Here's another example. You can see where the trees had snapped. That understory will be released. What's fascinating about it is we got a graphic here. The oldest ones snap off, release that understory. Well, these are now the oldest and the most vulnerable to the wind. So the wind comes in and snaps those off. These grow a little more. And so these waves continue, and it's basically the same population of these wind-adapted species that keep sprouting back in that site. So a monoculture of fir, for example, is totally consistent with ecology. And if you have a regular harvest of fir, and I'm bringing fir up for a reason, if you want to be a Christmas tree grower, if you raise Christmas trees, it's totally within ecological patterns to grow them for a period of years, cut it off, and replace that with the next generation of fir trees. And they can do this over and over and over and over for I don't know how many years. Some of these fir communities have been there, just being repeatedly snapped off at the leading edge, and then that leading edge moves back in waves. Ice storms. Those of you in the middle latitudes between the more colder and subarctic climates and the subtropics are very familiar with ice storms that come through. Ice storm damage is quite unique. It's not exactly like wind effects, but you see there's a lot of the overstory ends up getting removed during ice storm events. The difference between more wind damage and ice storm is that you'll have a lot of just snapped off tops of trees, a lot of dangling tops of trees, a lot of material laying around like this. Not as much pit and mound, although you still can have pit and mound if there was enough ice to pull the trees over and rip the roots out of the ground. And just want to look at the patterns here. This is kind of like what ice damage would look like as it starts breaking apart the forest, and it tends to, not always of course, but it tends to be patchy, spotty, and it will remove like large sections will get just a little bit more ice, and the trees fall over and knock over other trees, so there'll be more pockets and openings within a forest community. And so just on the right, I wanted to show some comparisons here of these pictures here. Look more like what? It looks more to me like light to moderate thinning. So if we have a forest stand and we do a light to moderate thinning, in one sense that's imitating the effects of a light to moderate thinning by ice storms. On my property is up in Maine. There was an ice storm 5 or 6 years ago, and what was really interesting is I noticed on a lot of the younger regeneration of the younger trees that had not been thinned. I did not remove trees to allow the remaining trees to grow faster. Where I did not thin them, they tended to have more ice damage than where I did thin them. And I'm assuming that a lot of that has to do with the fact that the remaining trees, when I had thinned them, grew sturdier and stouter and stronger because they had more sun and more resources per individual tree. So in an ice area, that may be one strategy that's successful for you. It's still not completely successful. There's a project that we're working on in Kentucky that their original decision-making event, they had their farm was 80 acres. The neighbors' overflow kept eroding through the middle of their farm until eventually they couldn't access 40 acres of it because of the erosion gully going down the middle. The open oak savanna that was there that they had been grazing under grew up with all kinds of brush underneath, and then an ice storm event came through and broke a lot of trees. Many of the overstory trees, huge oaks, like 2-foot diameter, gigantic oaks, a lot of the tops broke out of it. And so they started doing a salvage cut on the opposite side. They needed to make a bridge to go across. They started the permit process to get permission to cross the stream, yada, yada. And that led them to say, hey, let's do some restoration work here, get it back to savanna phase, and be able to graze again. Pest and disease damage. Pest and disease damage is often quite spotty. You'll take out pockets here and there for some reason. Not all the reasons are known why. The disease or the pests only affect certain individuals within the community. These are spruce, infected with spruce bark beetle. This is in Wisconsin, and unfortunately the aerial photo doesn't continue over here. I wish it did, because this is a project that I designed and did the install on. It's called the Wild Harvest Farm. This is all part of the River Edge Nature Sanctuary in Newburgh, Wisconsin. And what we see here is emerald ash borer. Now, emerald ash borer is not native to North America, so it's an introduced species. It's treated by many folks as an invasive species. Well, if you view the world through your concept of invasion, of course you'll go fight the invasion. Or if you just stand back, get a plane's eye view here, and try to understand what is happening in this plant community. How is this affecting the remaining forest stand? How is it, affecting the nutrient cycling, water infiltration, et cetera, et cetera? We need to have a bigger understanding and know now that we have new conditions to manage for in areas of North America where emerald ash borer exists. And to just understand that we have new conditions. Let's not freak out and panic and try to protect this, because one of the fascinating things about insects in forestry is that human beings have yet to eliminate any insect pest in forestry, period. We haven't been able to figure that out yet. I think that that's probably going to be the case across the board with all pests and diseases. Look what's happened in annual agriculture. All of the herbicides in the world have not eliminated weeds. All the pesticides in the world have not eliminated pests. They've actually gotten worse because now we're breeding herbicide-resistant weeds and pesticide-resistant pests. So let's understand how these communities work. What will happen if all of a sudden we open up this canopy? There's now no more shade. It's going to release whatever the understory is. What are those understory plants that are in association with ash? And since we know that ash likes to, it's found quite frequently in very moist sites. You won't find ash trees in deserts. The green ash is the most drought hardy of the ashes. There's all different subspecies of ash. We know that some sort of moisture-loving species will replace this. Why not use this as an opportunity? One, to harvest a whole bunch of saw logs, firewood. It's not really good for inoculating with mushrooms after it's already died from the pest. Let's go ahead and replace this with some sort of moisture-loving riparian species that actually has some kind of crop, walnut, for example, or pecan. This is a pine borer infestation outbreak, shall we call it, that has taken up quite a bit of the forest stand. What is interesting too, a lot of the pine and spruce budworm type infections and outbreaks are happening in fairly young stands in geological time. You know, they may be old for you and me, but they're on places that are just recently out of glaciation, for example. Like the glacier, the level of glaciers and snow in the Rocky Mountains has gone up in altitude. And of course, the extent of permanent ice has gone north on the continent, south, of course, in South America. Well, these were like the early successional conifers that came in after the original pioneer species of the grasses and the shrubs, and then these conifer stands. Well, I wonder sometimes if maybe this is just, that's it, they're done. It's supposed to be time for the next ecological succession to come in and replace that. Has the soil mineral composition changed now that the trees are not as healthy, and now they become somewhat of a magnet for the pests that come in and clean up the mess? Obviously in drier areas, when you have such massive diebacks like this, you will have additional fire hazards. And so if you're in an area that is experiencing some sort of pest or disease outbreak, how can we work with this process? We know that there is a stand replacement going on. These pines are disappearing. Are they being replaced from underneath? We don't know this from the aerial photograph. Well, what would we replace them with? What crop would we follow next? Perhaps a somewhat shade-tolerant species that would go in when this overstory is removed. And, of course, we live there. If you live at this house in here, it's probably in your best interest to start removing the dead material, get some good green vegetation in here to protect yourself from catastrophic wildfires. It's one of the things that happens with pests and diseases is sometimes entire species get eliminated. This is a very poor aerial photograph of Warren Dunes State Park in Michigan, one of my favorite places to go to. There is a fairly significant outbreak of oak wilt. And notice the difference here with the oak wilt. Oak wilt is transmitted by root contact between susceptible species. And so there have been several different places where they've successfully isolated oak wilt to a stand. Doing that by removing all of the species ahead of time. Remove the oaks here that might have roots connected with this, and then that would spare these next door. It's only a temporary fix, I'm sure, as this population changes and propagates, however, propagates besides through root contact. But when you eliminate oak from this component, as a component of this system, look who's behind. We got a lot of these white pines behind, looks like some spruces behind. There's probably, I know as a fact in Warren Dunes, there's a lot of aspen that would flourish now that the sun is opening up. So what has happened is we've had a total, in this area, an elimination of a species completely. That's gone from the gene pool. And then the classic story in North America with elimination of species is the American chestnut. I've read reports somewhere that American chestnut was about 30 to 40% of all biomass east of the Mississippi River was chestnut. They grew to gigantic proportions. Obviously, we see this over here. That's like 2 people. These are short people because it's 1924. So let's say 6 feet, right? So 18-foot diameter trunks. These are easily 10 or 12-foot diameter trunks. Just huge, monstrous trees. Well, yes, they were infected by a disease that was imported from China on an ornamental plant. The Chinese has co-evolved with the disease for zillenia. When it hit the Americans, they had no resistance to it. I mean, no resistance to it whatsoever, and they died. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, is not mine to say. The majority of the chestnut was logged. It was decided that in order to prevent the spread of chestnut blight, let's cut down all the chestnuts. And that seems to me a lot like, let's go to the old folks' home and shoot all the old people so they don't get the flu. What was possibly lost, it was possible that there were resistant individuals out in the population, but by cutting down all the trees and eradicating them from the ecosystem, we never had the opportunity to see which trees those were that had natural resistance. Now, what's the ecological effect of wiping out that species? Well, there's a tremendous amount of biomass in the root system. All that carbon has stayed in the soil. There are still some old stumps kicking around. American chestnut was very rot resistant, and these stumps now become nurse trees for other species. You can see, I think that looks like a yellow birch to me. Obviously, the mosses and lichens that are growing on it. And then they still persist as an understory shrub. They'll grow up to about this diameter, 4 to 6 inch diameter, before they get the blight, and then they die. And what's interesting in Europe, it was discovered that there was a fungus that actually feeds on the chestnut blight fungus as its food source, and it's called the hypovirulent strain of this particular fungus. So they began inoculating American chestnuts and inoculating European chestnuts with this hypovirulent fungus. Well, what was happening in the Americas is that the hypovirulent strain would save an individual tree from getting blight, but it wouldn't propagate and spread to other trees, whereas in Europe it did propagate and spread to other trees. And so then the hypovirulence and the chestnut blight coexist in a pretty ugly, but it's a fairly static harmony. And so European chestnut can still be grown, is grown. All plants and trees, of course, have diseases that co-host with it. How do we, as restoration agriculture practitioners, how do we deal with and manage for disease resistance in our trees? One of the strategies that we use is mass selection breeding. And we go ahead and we'll plant a zillion seeds of a particular variety, and constantly breeding, we can keep that resistance in the gene pool and actually conserve. Last week, anyways, I think, one of the fire survival strategies for trees is to have hyper precocious young. It's like a tree grows, and very young age it starts to produce seeds. That's one way it can survive fire. Well, that's one way that chestnut in the U.S. has persisted, is the fact that there are some individuals that are very, very young to reproduce. I have 2 family lines of chestnuts that the seed from them, you plant the seed, and a very high proportion of them, they sprout and immediately have a flower and will set a nut that very first year right out of the ground. We can use those strategies to our advantage in a restoration agriculture system. This is an interesting photograph. Excuse me, I just took a drink. And then it shows a couple different things. What we have is water. Obviously, there's water inundating these trees. Sometimes areas that, whether there's a beaver dam that blocks a stream, a mudslide happens from a hill and blocks a stream, water can back up, or it could be from a long, persistent set of floods. Southwest Wisconsin, we have had a total of 6 major flooding events in the past 5 weeks. My dad is actually finally able to leave his house and get to town and get supplies and all that. What will happen in Southwest Wisconsin, guaranteed, there's going to be trees that died, that they were submerged in the water too long and they died. Well, this right here, some people say, oh yeah, there's something that blocked the water and the water backed up. But that's not the case. This is Turnagain Arm near Anchorage, Alaska. And what had happened in 1964, there was a large earthquake. And a lot of the silt that was deposited, these are all silt mudflats, all these glacial streams just depositing silt over and over and over and over again. So this is river delta material. When this earthquake hit in 1964, massive jiggle, there was a tremendous amount of subsidence. The earth just sunk. In some places, 30 feet, it just dropped, just right in. And then, of course, the water This is actually salt water in this case, now has drowned this out. So water has different effects. This is another photograph of Turnagain Arm in Alaska. Other effects of water, this is Lafarge, Wisconsin. There are going to be some trees that don't make it, that got established in drier times and persisted for a while, but then being submerged like this for a month killed them. So some of the flood adaptation strategies are they can handle being submerged for long periods of time. They can handle soaking wet roots. If you take a chestnut tree and you get its roots wet, they're going to rot. The Phytophthora crown and root rot's just going to kick in, and you're going to slime your tree away. So flood-resistant trees have some sort of ability to survive saturated and anaerobic soils for a period of time. There's no oxygen in the soil underneath these trees over here. What we see here, we showed the slide a few weeks ago. This is also in southwest Wisconsin. You can see we got evidence because we have the flow pattern is obvious in the plants. You see all the plants are matted down, pushed in one particular direction. This is a willow tree. Many of the flood adapted trees will sprout from root cuttings, readily sprout from root cuttings. So here's this willow. It'll now sprout up that way, and if it ever fell over enough to touch the ground, it can send down more roots over here, and it turns into more individuals of itself. Whoops, I went backwards. Didn't mean to. Animals. There's all kinds of animal impacts from just the knockdown destruction that elephants are doing here and here, stripping of bark, browsing of branches. Here's cattle on my farm browsing chestnut and black locust. And here's wildebeest. They're grazing on the grass. The elephants would be impacting this. Animals, hoof impact, the fertility addition, microflora, gut flora and fauna from these animals adds to the soil food web beneath. When trees are browsed, they'll slough a lot of roots. Roots will die back. Also, in the case of like nitrogen fixers, like back here with these black locusts, if you go ahead and browse these back severely, or elephant knocked them down, all of the nitrogen fixing nodules on their roots, they've got no place else to send their fertilizer. They were formerly fertilizing this tree so it grows real fast. Well, you cut this down or severely browse it, that nitrogen gets released into the soil, and then the grasses can use it. You have a more rapid grass response. And there we go. And then, of course, exclusion of disturbance is its own kind of disturbance. And we see here this was an open park-like area with grasses underneath. And now that we've been participating in this course, we know that this right here is evidence that it had been burning quite regularly. And if you look at the big fire scar here, you could probably go in and count the number of fires, and then count the space between fire scars, and count the rings, and see how many years on average it was between fires. And another way to look at the fire interval and learn the fire interval is we see very little brushy stuff, very few shrubs, and hardly, I don't see any hardly understory trees growing up here. It takes about 20 years for many fire-resistant trees to develop thick enough bark to resist fires, surface fires. And so what we probably can assume is that fires have been happening at least every 20 years here because there aren't any young trees and shrubs. And then what we see here, obviously, these may not have gone 20 years. This is extremely susceptible to fire, and you could actually torch out and have a crown fire and kill the redwoods that are over it. Now, I'm going to tie this into some actual projects that I've been working on, and maybe introduce a little bit one of the projects we've got in the works. I've been working in Africa, in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania for the past 5 years or so, working with schools and a couple of different nonprofits in doing restoration agriculture type work. And of course, with restoration agriculture, we're going to optimize the hydrology of the site, whatever rain falls on the ground, we're going to capture it, spread it out, soak it in. We're going to then imitate natural plant communities with our species composition, and we'll manage it more like as a wild planting instead of as a orchard. And then we'll use agroforestry systems in order to cash flow for one, or in the case of where we're working in Africa, is they still feed themselves from very small plots of land, and we cannot decrease the food supply available to the folks, so they literally will starve to death. So we'll do agroforestry systems where we plant a row, a wild imitated row, and then have an alley in between where they're growing their crops. And we'll just see some pictures of this. So the addition of new species, like with the diseases and the pests, we could see like American chestnut. Here was this tree. It was the dominant tree in the eastern half of the USA. All of a sudden gone. What happens when you eliminate that? What happens when you eliminate, white ash from an ecosystem? Somebody else responds and fills in the gap. What's interesting with the addition of species, not all sites have the best, most adapted plants growing on them. The plants that are growing on them are the ones that happen to survive there through whatever circumstances, fire and wind and pest and disease regime, but they may not necessarily be the most adapted for that site. A good example is American hazelnut. In the upper Midwest, you'll find it in sandy floodplains, real dry, droughty soil. And people say, oh, that's because hazelnut likes the dry soil. It's like, well, first of all, we don't know that it has the ability to feel an emotion like humans do. We don't know if it does or not. And it's not that it would prefer to be on a dry, sandy site. It's just that it's one of the few plants that can survive on that site. And so whatever's in the area as seed, something else wasn't able to get established. Well, if you all of a sudden bring in a new species, it may actually be better adapted to that site than the local native varieties, and it will outcompete on that site. There's examples on islands like New Zealand, for example, Hawaii is another one, where you've had a specific suite of species existing there for a long period of time, then introduced species come in and actually grow better than the local native species. And in some cases, like I know in New Zealand, foresters and landowners are allowing that to happen, the replacement of their natives with the non-natives, simply because the non-natives are producing more lumber on your woodlot. And if you're in the business of at least periodically, episodically selling lumber as part of your overall enterprise, it makes sense to you to have faster growing trees, more trees, etc. And so by adding species, there will be changes ongoing. And so what we've got here is a classic example of, once upon a time, this was high tropical forest. This particular region here, this is near Lake Victoria in Tanzania. This particular region was high forest, but it was monsoon forest. Has a major rainy period and then a short rainy period. Short rainy period was like in November-ish, October, November. And then a major rainy season like in February, March, April, sometimes going into May. And then the rest of the year, I mean, there's nothing. It just dries off, and it is hot and dusty. I don't like living in a place that's not humid all the time, so it was very uncomfortable for me to hang out in the dry season at this site. And as you can see, once the high forest was eliminated, they plowed up the ground. They're using a lot of oxen, a lot of hand tools. These particular pangas, big, huge, I like to call it like the peasant hoe. I don't know why people still use it. It's a back-breaking tool. So that's how they would till the ground, grow a crop of maize, for example, and that's 100% of their annual food supply comes from their little garden plot. And if it's only maize, you can have nutritional issues. If you don't make a good crop of maize, your family starves. So there's a lot of issues with what has happened with annual agriculture, especially in third world vulnerable populations. So we manage the water. That's what these ditches are. Let's catch them off this road. This is a local road, maybe 5 cars a day go by. Plus, we also harvest all of the water off of roofs, and we channel it through the system so it would slowly flow, and instead of running off, it used to run off in that direction, we intercept that runoff, soak it in right at the roots of the trees. And actually, white guys actually have been known to work sometimes in Africa. I've gotten the reputation of being called Babu Mapandamiti, which is the grandpa who plants trees. And sometimes there'll be like gangs of school kids just like watching me work because it's so uncommon for them to see white guys working. So we start with managing the water. And then, this is more common, to watch the white guys watch the women work. So we built these. These are not raised beds. These are actually depressed ditches to catch the water, spread it out. Then straight out of the permaculture designer's manual, we did some banana circles. You dig a trench. So there's a mound around the trench, and you fill the trench with organic matter. It's a micro pit. When it rains, rain will go in there. We've told everybody that if you want to urinate, this is where you urinate, right in the center of the banana pits. And then we planted through the center of this. These are all the trees that will be tall. And let's see, this is Grevillea, that's avocado. These are, of course, bananas. And then just on the outside, right in here, we don't have them planted in this system yet, are more of the medium to taller shrubs. We planted a lot of papaya, a lot of pomegranate, which was more of a shrub. Papaya would grow tall, but you want to cut it periodically so it continues to produce. Then on the outside of that, we had a row of ginger. So there's ginger in here. Then pineapple. Pineapple's fascinating in that it has very poor root systems, and it gets most of its nutrition from the foliage. So these are sunk in a little pit, and any animal waste from the chickens would go to, you just sprinkle right around the base here of the pineapples. So we had pineapple, ginger, sometimes garlic, pomegranate, papaya. Grevillea is used mostly just as a timber source, poles, fuel wood. So part of what we're doing here is giving them an incentive to not cut down existing forest trees, but to manage this system and have wood as one of the resources. And once the bananas produce fruit, you cut that stem down, you lay it down, you poke holes in it, and you plant other plants in that hole, because the banana stem itself holds a tremendous amount of water, and other species like to grow in that. So here's more of the system as it's laid out. And notice we've got this row. Then the alley, they'll continue to grow their crops in their alley. So this is the establishment here. Here's in the pit. This is, we've got moringa planted in here. The moringa leaves are one of the most nutritious greens that you ever could imagine. The seeds are fairly high in oil, 30–40% oil. The grain left over from oil extraction can be used to feed livestock. It's a high protein livestock feed. So we're trying to include food for people, feed for animals, fuel in the form of firewood, and oil that can be used for cooking, or as a fuel in the village diesel generator, that sort of thing. Nitrogen fixing plants, we have some nitrogen fixing plants, woody plants in it, but actually most of the nitrogen fixation that we're looking for is in the decomposition process. Once you set these systems up, and if you really see some cool tropical stuff, look up Ernst Getsch, however you pronounce it. If somebody in the comments can write how you spell that, I think it's Goetsch. He's down in Brazil, and once you get to the point where you're generating extra leaves and extra branches, this whole system will just pop and just start to grow really fast, because all this decomposition is what's driving the fertility cycle. Much of the nitrogen fixation that's occurring happens with fungi and bacteria, free-floating fungi and bacteria that have nothing to do with rhizobia on tree roots or on legume roots. Well, in our systems here, also some of the nitrogen fixation comes from legumes growing. For example, they grow lots of peanut here, cowpea, Of course, various different dry beans that they will grow for their own consumption. And then mulch was used. This is in a rice growing region. So a lot of the rice straw afterwards, that straw that's not used for thatching roofs, it's actually an economic crop for them, is selling their straw as roofs. It's used as a mulch. Any organic matter. This is a region where they were typically burning. They put any organic matter in pile. You get sticks that were too small to use for cooking would just be pushed in a pile and burned. Dry grasses would just be raked up and burned. And we've gotten at least this local community to start composting and mulching like crazy. There's one place where we work on the western shore of Lake Victoria that is like, they've gotten fanatic about mulching, and they've gotten to the point where they aren't producing all the mulch that they want, and so they've started to buy mulch from somewhere else and bring it in. I think that's going a little bit too far with the mulching thing. It's working really well for that community. So get everything mulched, because we need to preserve that moisture, because when it's 100 degrees and dry as a bone, you lose all your moisture. Within a year, they now have a new nutritional diversity. They've got papayas grown in 3 or 4 years. So when you're developing a system, whether it's temperate or tropical, think of all these different time sequences when you plant your perennials. Plant stuff that turns around and matures in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. In the North American context, the oak savanna mimic that I work quite a bit with, you've got raspberries and currants that they'll start producing crops the second year you've planted them, very first year after you've planted them. Grapes, like in 3 to 5 years, they'll start producing heavily. Plums, 5 to 7. Hazelnuts, 5 to 7. Chestnuts, 7 to 12. Before they start really producing well. Walnuts, 12 to 20. Pine nuts, in that 8 to 20 range. And so you want to pick a series of plants that ripen over, that start to come into production through a time sequence. And then, of course, they're able now to grow they have more shade, so they lose less moisture. They're able to grow more vegetable crops. And this particular operation here, we were working with a school, and within the first year, they were able to grow 60% of their vegetables in this system, whereas before they were buying vegetables. Then you got shade. When it's 1,000,000 degrees, you'll notice that everybody's hanging out underneath the shade. This tree right here, this big round one with all this dark shade, is the tree that convinced this community that this type of agriculture is a good idea. We trained a whole bunch of the local folks. They came to the course. They were actually given a small stipend to come to the course so they could buy food for their families. And they sat like a bunch of stone-faced people looking at me like I'm some kind of white idiot until I got to the point saying, see that mango tree right over there? Because this is a mango tree. This mango tree was enormous, like 6 or 8 foot around. Think of all of the things that mango tree does. And then I had them come up with answers of all the incredible things that the mango tree, it's got wood for fuel, it's got the fruit, it's got, there was something that they do with the pit, they pop it apart and they use the seed in the center part of it. But the one thing that everybody in this whole area realized that was so significant about that mango tree is look at the shade underneath. If you stand in the shade under this mango tree, you still may be dry as a bone, you still may be hungry, but you're not cooking out in the sun. And then when I asked them, I said, okay, who planted that mango tree for you? And they couldn't answer it. They just didn't know. It just came from somewhere. I said, well, okay, you now have the opportunity to plant all these different trees for your grandchildren. So someday they'll sit in the shade and they'll thank you for what you did for their community. And this right here is just so beautiful to stand in the shade. This is about 3 years in at this one particular site. And this is that original planting that I showed you with the mulch, with the pineapples, and just amazing the difference. It is also amazing how fast things grow in the tropics. But the humidity, the birds, there's an amazing diversity of bird life here that there never used to be birds, so to speak, at this particular site. Well, now that there's about pushing 30 acres that we've converted The diversity of birds, it's just phenomenal. And frogs are another amazing population boom happened with frogs, because now you've got all this extra moisture. Mosquitoes haven't seen too much of an increase, but in this particular area here, the mosquitoes are just insane anyways, and they're malarial, and bed nets are important. But this is what you can do in just a few short years by adding species. Now this site is at the process of, it's big enough, and here's the pomegranate right here. This is a casamvu, which is the male of a cassava. The root's not eaten, the foliage is. On the female, the foliage is poisonous, on the male, it's not. And so there's everything in here is edible somehow. So this is a system that is now going through trial by pest and trial by disease. This particular species, Grevillea right here, in densely packed systems like this, it's too humid, and there's a particular kind of weeping bark disease that it's getting. So they get removed sooner rather than later and used for firewood, building poles, etc. The pomegranate is amazing how well it's doing in this system, but people have no history of using the crop. So this is now going through its own succession, and we'll get into succession later on, of all these different interactions below ground, above ground, and just the diversity of food. What would you rather do? Would you rather live at a place that looks like this, or that first picture with just the bare sand around it? This is actually a bean, a real climbing bean that's all over the place. And these are obviously bananas as an overstory. That we also use nitrogen-fixing trees. Gliricidia is one, and Phyderbia is another one. This region there's now a small produce distribution business going on, where this fella here, right there, has a truck, and once a week he goes to town and he takes everybody's, whatever the produce du jour is. You feed your family first, and then he'll take it to town on Friday and sell it at the market to wholesalers. And so now we've got real economic development. You've got shade, you've got food. We strive to plant food so there's something year-round to eat. In the northern climates, the more temperate to subarctic climates, we have to rely on food storage. We grow all our food in the summertime and then store it. We still have extra. I don't know if any of you have ever grown an acre of acorn squash, for example, but 35,000 pounds of acorn squash will feed a heck of a lot of people. I can't eat it all, so I collaborate with my neighbors. We put it all on a truck, and it goes to town. That's now our economic system. Macadamias. Once you start throwing in all these other species, you have a genuine ecologically produced surplus. Zero inputs to this other than people in there managing it and pooping and peeing on it. Breadfruit, the largest fruit on the planet, some of them are bigger than the biggest watermelon you've ever seen. The largest tree fruit on the planet. Okay, so the 1,800 pound gigantic freak pumpkin is probably the biggest fruit. Who knows what this is? Here's cocoa. Now they're making value-added products. They have an oil press. They're pressing oil. They're making sugars from the plants, from the fruits. They're making hot sauces and soap from the oils. And pretty soon in Uganda, we're going to be working on chocolate products, locally grown, locally processed, and marketed wherever it's got to go. And, is there a difference between the soil? This was from the alley where they were growing their maize, and this is from underneath the woody polyculture. And this is moister, that's drier. This has more nutrient holding capacity. This has less. This is just another site next to a school building. All of the roofs and any sidewalk areas are all ditched and channeled to spill out right here on this rock. And I, in order to prove a point, this is my first garden, I'll call it, there in this particular village. I said, okay, we're gonna plant a garden right here on this rock, and I'm willing to bet you a nickel or a shilingi that in 1 year we'll be producing more food on that rock with less work than you are in your rice paddies. And it didn't take long at all. Like I said, papayas in 4 months. So we just, where the water spilled off of the walkways and off the buildings, channel it in here, and then you make a little mound with what soil you had available, channel it out here, channel it back and forth down this hill, and we planted these trees right on the rock and the cracks between the rocks. And we plant a ton of different things in there. Not everything's going to survive, and let's find out what happens as it changes through time. There's coffee in this one. There's the jackfruit, breadfruit. You see some pineapples sticking up. There's pomegranates. We also planted taro. We planted comfrey. That's a plantain, not a banana. And the papayas, obviously. So the papayas were the first one to really kick butt. This is only right there to here. That's 6 months growth. That's the tropics for you. Tropics for you with water concentrated in this spot. And more arid areas are going to have to concentrate your water. So another 6 months later, the plantain tree is much larger. There's papayas all over the place. One of these casuarina trees died, and I wonder if it's because we concentrated all the water here and it got some sort of root rot. So it was removed, not a problem. They use it as building material and as firewood. And just look at the diversity, and under here there's where we have taro root growing. There's avocado in here. There's that's avocado. So this was 3 years later, and 4 years later. This is what we can do. We can accomplish ecological restoration and agricultural production simultaneously. We can't do it if we destroy natural ecosystems in order to plant annual crops that continue to waste away the soil, mess with the hydrology, and species diversity, etc. Because then what ends up happening is we end up in a situation like is going on in Africa, and these are from Uganda, despite the Kenya T-shirt, whereas there are now these preserves where human beings have said, okay, we're going to preserve this area because there are chimps there and they're rare and endangered. So we draw this magic line around this preserve, and we do nothing to help the chimps at all, other than try to stop people from going in and killing them, eating them. But they have to fend for themselves, and if that ecosystem happens to not be the best for chimps, we don't care. We don't do any rehab to their habitat. Well, then on the outside, there are people that are now dependent on, in this part of Uganda, totally hooked on the sugarcane industry. One of the largest sugar companies in the world, basically owns most of northern Uganda. And so you've got these hard lines between agriculture and nature, and when the chimps come out because they're hungry and they steal food from the people kill the chimps. Well, then when the people are hungry because their systems are failing, they move in and they start cutting the trees down to make charcoal, to get some money, to buy food. That is a conflicted system that doesn't work. So in Africa, in starting in Uganda, in collaboration with the Jane Goodall Institute, which is where I've been the past 2 days, is meeting with the board of directors of the Jane Goodall Institute. We're beginning to build riparian zone corridors between chimpanzee preserves and buffers around the chimpanzee preserves that chimps don't like and humans actually can use economically. And then within the village areas, starting with the schools, we're doing these deeply diverse perennial ecosystems that'll look like this. And then they'll be partnered with school curricula, nurseries, value-added products, processing, marketing, so that we can have smallholders not only growing their own little subsistence homesteads, we'll have more food year-round for the folks, and then their surplus gets sold through whatever organization we assist them to set up. They now own a piece of that business as it grows and changes. And same with the transportation companies that bring the product to town. So now you're not just a farmer, you're a farmer and a business owner of these various different enterprises. And as the this corridor project develops more. We've already done a soft release of the Uganda Chimp Corridor project. We haven't done a firm release where we do all the press splash and blah, blah, blah. We'll get to that later. So you guys kind of heard it first that for the first time in human history, we're actually going to be doing ecological restoration. We're going to plant extra food plants for the chimps within the chimp reserve. We're going to have buffers connected and do permaculture around these people, and it's over hundreds of thousands of acres that the project area will eventually cover. So anyways, time for a few questions. Stephanie, if you will field them for me, because I can't see the questions thing.
Absolutely. We don't have too many yet. So everybody out there, throw in your questions if you have any. We have one from Ray. Says, thank you for the interesting pics and info. My question tonight is about pawpaw. It's spelled P-A-W, P-A-W.
Right.
Do you see it fitting into a restoration project?
Well, absolutely. Pawpaw is it's a shade-tolerant understory plant. The picture that I showed you of the Warren Dunes where the oak wilt was, the understory of pawpaw, it survives in the understory but doesn't fruit very much. Then all of a sudden the oak wilt comes in and wipes out all the overstory. There's now no more shade, and you've got these pawpaws that have been getting large in the shade. All of a sudden they get hit with the full sun. They got all this extra energy, and kaboom, there's pawpaws all over them. So absolutely, pawpaws are part of a restoration ag system. Go somewhere and find out what the native range of pawpaw has been historically, and then you just also underlay that beneath the forest canopy that appears in that same area. It's more of a bottomlands. I've seen it in the east. Actually, here I'm in Virginia right now. It is somewhat of an understory with would have been formerly chestnut because all the chestnuts are gone. So it's now oak and tulip poplar. It's an understory there. So it's absolutely a part of a system. If it's part of your natural plant community, go for it.
Awesome. She says, glad to hear it. Thank you. So here's one. Have you experienced much luck with growing blight-resistant American chestnut?
Boy, the American Chestnut Foundation has been doing a backbreeding project where you start by breeding Americans with Chinese, and then you keep breeding back to Americans, and mathematically it'll only take 3 generations to get an American chestnut that's 98% pure American and 2% Chinese, and it's resistant to the blight. They have those trees now. They're being used as fundraiser for the organization, and they're now in the stage of growing those out. It'll take 7 to 10 years before they get large enough before they are able to host blight. So it's not really known how successful that is. What I've done is where I live in southwest Wisconsin, I've taken American chestnut that I sourced from the west coast of the U.S., and then Chinese chestnut, which I sourced all over the place. The Chinese chestnut is not cold hardy in most of our winters, and so will freeze back to the ground. The American chestnut is very cold hardy. So then I've planted hybridized, American Chinese crosses, American European crosses, and then I just start saving the seed of the ones that reproduce the fastest. And I probably have more chestnut blight in my chestnut populations than anybody else anywhere, and I'm okay with that because I want to know if my trees are resistant. So I want to have enough disease around to infect everybody. And so the forest ag, if you go to forestag.com, the hybrid chestnuts that we sell have come from parent trees at New Forest Farm that haven't gotten the blight. We don't know what their genetics are. We don't know if it's more American or if it's more, Chinese. There's hardly any European really represented in my plantings anymore. Those characteristics have kind of petered out. So yeah, I'm growing chestnuts. Are they blight-resistant Americans? Probably not. There's a lot of them that sure look American, act American, and they don't have a blight yet. Why? I don't know. Are they resistant? I don't know. We'll find out over time. But back to American chestnut. American chestnut actually is increasing its range in the wild. It is actually spreading and growing as a population. And you're like, what? How can it be doing that if it's totally blighted? Well, where it's growing in the wild, it's completely naturalized, is on the West Coast. And so Northern California, Oregon, Washington have new populations of American chestnut that have been growing and expanding into forested regions. And so just because it got disease and died in its home range doesn't mean that it's out of the game. And what's fascinating is it's in Belgium, I think it is. The world's tallest American chestnut, pure American chestnut, is growing in the forest preserve of the former king. And I think it's approaching 200 feet tall. It's actually one of the tallest trees in the world. And it's an American chestnut tree in Belgium, of all places. So have I had any experience growing blight-resistant American chestnuts? I don't know. I may have some. I don't know. So yes, no, maybe, I think. I'm just growing chestnuts. Because my goal, you know, and a lot of people in the chestnut world too have given me a hard time. It's like, you haven't solved any of the problems with chestnut. It's like, that's not the point. The point really is, I'm in the chestnut business. I've been growing and selling chestnuts for you know, almost 20 years now. I have chestnuts, and if you come to my place, it doesn't look like an orchard. It looks like somebody hit it with napalm, for crying out loud. There's dead trees and disease all over the place, broken branches. To the orchard-trained aesthetic, it's ugly. But I sell chestnuts. I sell lots of chestnuts. We grow lots of chestnuts. We fatten pigs on chestnuts because we have them. We've been planting them, and we're coexisting with the disease. Some of my favorite trees have died, which is a drag, but you know, whatever, it happens. So that's another aspect of restoration agriculture, is it's not going to look like what other people think it's going to look like. And that's okay. That's okay, because we're in the business. Anyhow.
I love it.
If there aren't any more questions, or however many there are, I can let everybody go. What we're going to be doing next week is we're going to be moving into succession itself. Some of the technical details of succession. And remember, all of this is so we can actually be better permaculturists. And one of the first things that Bill Mollison said, David Holmgren said, as a permaculture designer, we want to observe nature, imitate it, and interact with it. From my perspective, if you have taken a permaculture design course, and even if you're just a permaculture adherent, and if you aren't observing nature, imitating nature, and interacting with it, you are not a permaculturist. You have failed the first thing, to observe nature, imitate it, and interact with it. Well, how do we observe nature? Well, by observing it, we have to understand how it works in order to imitate it. So that's why we're studying ecology, because at its fundamental core, permaculture is about understanding the natural world that we live in, imitating it, and interacting with it. And so that's why we're going through forest ecology curriculum.
Thank you so much, Mark. We did have a couple more questions, but if you guys show up next week, you can just get them at the very beginning of the hour, and we'll make sure to get to them. Thank you all for sticking around. It's been a great session, and we'll see you all next week.
See you next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Yep, bye-bye.
Bye.